All right, you vodka-soaked degenerates, welcome back to the deep dive.
Ah, here we go again.
So it seems like you fuckers are interested in the Soviet Union.
Color me surprised.
Yeah, you want to really just dive headfirst into that clusterfuck of communism, vodka, and those badass fur hats.
Well, buckle up, Buttercup. It's going to be a bumpy ride.
We've got this Wikipedia article here,
Oh, yeah, I know that one.
and it's denser than a Stalin-era fruitcake. Let's just say that.
I tried to read that thing. It's a beast.
Yeah, so we had to drag in this magnificent bastard of a historian to break it down for us.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me.
So before we even get started, let's clear up one thing real quick.
Okay, shoot.
The Soviet Union, it wasn't just like Russia.
Oh, God, no. Not even close.
Yeah, some asshats seem to think that it was just Russia, but
This happens when you let the Americans teach you history, I guess.
yeah, it was like 15 republics all crammed together under the iron fist of the Kremlin.
Yeah, 15 republics, all with their own unique cultures and languages and histories, but all forced to play by Moscow's rules.
So kind of like a family Thanksgiving where one sibling just keeps grabbing all the best vodka and making everyone else listen to his shitty balalaika music.
Pretty much, yeah. You've got the domineering older brother, Russia, calling all the shots, and the rest of the siblings are just trying to make the best of a bad situation.
So let's talk about that system, man.
Oh, you mean that glorious clusterfuck they called a government?
They had this thing called the Supreme Soviet.
Yeah, the Supreme Soviet, which sounds like some kind of superhero team, but in reality, it was about as powerful as a wet paper bag.
So basically, it was just a rubber stamp for the Communist Party.
Pretty much. The party was the real power broker. They controlled everything. The government, the economy, even what kind of toilet paper you could buy.
Seriously.
Yeah.
What kind of control freak gets off on dictating toilet paper choices?
The Soviet kind, my friend.
The Soviet. Well, speaking of control freaks, what about those infamous human rights abuses? We're talking gulags, purges, the whole 9 yards of Stalinist terror.
Yeah, there's no sugarcoating it. The Soviet Union's record on human rights was abysmal.
Abysmal. Like, seriously fucked up.
If you even thought about disagreeing with the government, you'd get a one-way ticket to the gulag, where you'd be lucky to survive on a diet of stale bread and despair.
So basically, it was like living in a giant prison, but with free healthcare.
Ah, yes, the famous Soviet healthcare system.
So was it any good? Or was it just another one of their propaganda bullshit?
Well, it was free, that's for sure, but good. Let's just say Soviet dentistry was enough to make you yearn for the sweet embrace of capitalism.
Seriously. They could put a man in space, but they couldn't figure out how to make decent toothpaste.
You see, that was the thing with the Soviets. They were all about these big, flashy prestige projects like the space program.
They were obsessed with space.
Oh, yeah. They wanted to show the world that they were a technological superpower.
But meanwhile, back on Earth, their citizens were waiting in line for hours just to buy a loaf of bread.
It was all about projecting an image while neglecting the basic needs of their people.
So basically a classic case of fake it till you make it, but on a national scale.
You got it.
Okay, so let's talk about this Cold War craziness.
Right.
What the hell was that all about?
You want to talk about a pissing contest between two superpowers with the whole world caught in the crossfire?
It was the Soviet Union versus the United States.
Each convinced that their way of life was superior.
And they were both willing to go to any lengths to prove it.
It wasn't just about nukes, although those were definitely a big part of it.
They were building up their arsenals like it was going out of style.
It was this ideological clash of the titans, communism versus capitalism.
It was like two drunk dudes at a bar arguing over which football team is better, but instead of throwing punches, they're rattling nuclear sabers.
And just like any good bar fight, there were plenty of innocent bystanders caught in the chaos.
Proxy wars in Vietnam, Afghanistan, all fueled by this ideological tug of war.
It was a crazy time, man. A crazy time.
And don't even get me started on that insane arms race.
They were churning out weapons like a vodka distillery on overdrive.
But how the hell did their economy even keep up?
It didn't. It was a disaster waiting to happen.
So imagine this.
Yeah.
You're pouring all your money into building tanks and missiles.
While your factories can't even produce a decent pair of shoes.
It's a recipe for economic disaster.
And that's exactly what it was.
Okay. So we've got a totalitarian state with a shitty economy and a strange obsession with space travel.
Sounds about right.
What was it actually like living in this shithole?
Well, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, that's for sure.
Was it all breadlines and gulags? Or was there something more to it?
It was a mixed bag, really.
So like a communist surprise grab bag? You never know what you're going to get.
Yeah, something like that. On the one hand, you had impressive achievements in education and literacy.
So they were churning out a bunch of literate communists.
Well, they were big on education. They wanted everyone to be able to read and write.
But there was a catch, wasn't there?
Of course, there was a catch. This was the Soviet Union, after all. That education came with a hefty dose of propaganda.
So you could read, but only what they wanted you to read.
That's the gist of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. They controlled the flow of information very tightly.
So basically, it was like living in a giant echo chamber.
Pretty much. They had this whole new man concept.
New man. What the hell is that?
They were trying to create the ideal Soviet citizen, hardworking, selfless, completely devoted to the state.
So basically, a cog in the giant communist machine.
You got it.
Sounds less like a new man and more like a Stepford commie to me.
Nah, that's one way to put it.
But hey, at least everyone was equally miserable.
Right. Ah, yes. The great communist utopia where everyone is equally poor and equally oppressed.
So much for equality, huh? It's like Animal Farm, but with worse fashion sense.
And a hell of a lot more vodka.
Now, that's something we can all agree on.
Cheers to that. But let's not forget about those infamous language policies.
Oh yeah, their obsession with words. They were like communist grammar Nazis or something.
Well, they went on this crusade to give every minority language a writing system.
Hold on. You're telling me these commie bastards were all about promoting diversity?
On the surface, it sounds all progressive and shit, right?
Yeah, but wasn't their whole goddamn system designed to crush anything that didn't fit their mold?
Bingo. It was a classic case of Soviet doublespeak.
So they'd give these minority groups a fancy new alphabet and then tell them, oh, by the way, Russian is still the official language, so you better learn that too, comrades.
Exactly. Learn it or else, basically.
So basically, a big fuck you disguised as a gift?
Pretty much, they were masters of manipulation.
Control freaks through and through.
They knew that a unified language meant a unified and easier to control populace.
Speaking of control, what about religion? Weren't these guys hardcore atheists?
Let's just say religion wasn't exactly high on their list of priorities.
Did they just like ban it outright or what?
Religion was seen as the opiate of the masses, a relic of the past that needed to be eradicated.
So churches turned into museums, priests shipped off to the gulag?
Yeah, pretty much.
So what the fuck did people do for spiritual guidance?
Well, you had your state-sanctioned atheism.
With pictures of Lenin replacing Jesus on the crucifix.
It was all about replacing faith in a higher power with faith in the communist system.
Sounds pretty fucking bleak, man. But, hey, everyone needs a little escape from reality, right? What did these poor bastards do for fun?
Well, believe it or not, they did find ways to have a good time.
So it wasn't all just vodka-fueled misery and watching propaganda films.
They went to the cinema, the theater, even the circus.
Hold on, the circus? Like with clowns and trained bears and shit?
Yeah, the Soviet circus was a big deal.
That doesn't exactly scream totalitarian state to me.
Well, think of it as their version of the Olympics. It was all about showcasing the prowess and discipline of the Soviet people, even in the realm of entertainment.
So even their clowns were hardcore.
You could say that.
Speaking of hardcore, what about music? Were they all just listening to some dreary communist anthems 24/7?
Surprisingly, no. You had your state-sponsored classical music, of course.
Like those bombastic symphonies that make you feel like you're marching into battle.
Yeah, those. But the real underground scene was all about rock and roll.
Wait a minute, rock and roll? I thought those commie bastards hated anything that smacked of Western decadence.
They tried to suppress it, but rock and roll was like a virus, man. It spread through the youth like wildfire.
So even under the watchful eye of Big Brother, they found ways to rock the fuck out.
Bands like Kino and Machine of Remini were speaking to the frustrations and dreams of a generation hungry for something more than just communist propaganda.
Rock and roll as a form of rebellion against the communist machine.
Exactly.
That's pretty badass. What about literature? Was there any room for free expression in that department?
Not so much. You had your officially sanctioned socialist realism.
Which was about as exciting as reading a phone book?
Yeah, it was pretty dry. But even under those conditions, some brave writers managed to sneak in some subversive messages.
Yeah, like those dudes who wrote samizdat literature. Basically self-published underground stuff.
Guys like Solzhenitsyn and Pasternak were risking their necks to expose the dark underbelly of the Soviet system.
Talk about balls of steel.
Their work gave a voice to the voiceless. They shone a light on the hypocrisy and brutality of the regime.
So they were basically literary rock stars, sticking it to the man with their pens instead of guitars.
You could say that.
Respect. All right, let's shift gears and talk about that infamous Soviet economy. How the hell did this whole communist experiment even function for as long as it did?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's a goddamn enigma.
It's like trying to figure out how a unicycle stays upright.
On paper, it was a centrally planned economy with the government controlling everything. In reality, it was a clusterfuck of shortages, inefficiencies, and a thriving black market.
So they were preaching about the virtues of communism while secretly relying on good old-fashioned capitalism to keep things from falling apart.
It was a system riddled with contradictions. They'd tout the idea of equality while the party elites were living like goddamn czars. They'd boast about their industrial might while their citizens were queuing up for hours to buy a loaf of bread.
Man, that's some next-level hypocrisy. Like those clowns juggling chainsaws while riding unicycles on a tightrope.
Yeah, it was a precarious balancing act.
Bound to collapse eventually. It was just a matter of time before the whole goddamn thing came crashing down.
And crash it did.
But before we get to the grand finale, the big Soviet swan song, let's take a quick detour and talk about those administrative divisions, 15 republics. That's a lot of moving parts. How the hell did they keep it all together even for a while?
It wasn't pretty. Think of it as a forced marriage between a bunch of unwilling partners with Russia as the jealous, controlling spouse.
And like any bad marriage, there's bound to be some resentment brewing under the surface, right?
Oh, absolutely. Those republics were constantly chafing under Russian dominance. They had their own cultures, languages, and histories, but they were all forced to conform to the Soviet mold.
So basically, it was a powder keg just waiting for a spark to ignite it.
Exactly, and those sparks started flying in the late 80s when Gorbachev came along with his perestroika and glasnost.
Hold on, rewind that perestroika glasnost. Those sound like the names of some Soviet knockoff vodka brands. What the hell were those?
Think of it as Gorbachev's attempt to give the Soviet system a much-needed makeover. Perestroika was about restructuring the economy, introducing some elements of free markets. Glasnost was about opening up the political system, allowing for greater freedom of speech and dissent.
So he was trying to loosen the reins a bit, let the Soviet people breathe. Was he some kind of communist hippie or something?
He was a reformer, trying to save the system from itself, but his reforms ended up backfiring spectacularly.
So did he accidentally give the people too much freedom?
Exactly. He opened Pandora's box, and all those pent-up frustrations and grievances came pouring out. The Republic started demanding independence. The people were no longer afraid to criticize the government, and the whole system started to unravel.
Sounds like he pulled the pin on a grenade and then tried to put it back in.
Yeah.
But hey, at least he gave those Soviet hardliners a heart attack, right?
Oh, yeah. Those old-school commies were shitting bricks watching their precious empire crumble before their eyes.
Well, that's what they get for clinging to a system that was as outdated as their goddamn fur hats. All right, you degenerates, welcome back to the Deep Dive. Now, where were we? Ah, yes, the grand finale of the Soviet Union, the communist curtain call. Let's get into how this whole goddamn thing went tits up.
It was a shit show from start to finish.
So what was the final straw? Did those commie hardliners finally choke on their own propaganda?
Well, Gorbachev's reforms definitely played a role.
So you're telling me this Gorbachev guy basically lit the fuse that blew up the whole damn empire?
He was trying to reform the system to save it, but in reality, he just accelerated its demise.
So he was like a well-intentioned idiot who accidentally brought down the whole damn system?
Pretty much. He gave the people a taste of freedom, and they wanted the whole damn buffet.
So once the genie was out of the bottle, there was no putting it back in.
The Republic started demanding independence, the people were no longer afraid to speak their minds, and the Communist Party was losing its grip on power.
So basically, it was a slow-motion train wreck that everyone saw coming, but no one could stop.
Exactly. And the August coup of 1991 was the final nail in the coffin.
Hold on, rewind that. The August coup, what the hell was that?
A bunch of hardline communists, those old guard dinosaurs, decided to stage a coup and try to seize control back from Gorbachev.
Seriously? They tried to stage a coup in the goddamn 20th century. Talk about being out of touch with reality.
It was a desperate last-ditch effort to preserve the crumbling Soviet empire, but the people weren't having it.
So the coup backfired spectacularly.
It collapsed faster than a poorly constructed Lada.
Karma's a bitch, ain't it? So with the coup failing miserably, what happened next? Did the Soviet Union just dissolve overnight?
It was more of a slow-motion implosion. After the coup, the Republic saw their chance and started declaring independence one after another.
This was like a domino effect. Once one republic broke away, the rest followed suit.
Yeah. By December 1991, the Soviet Union was officially kaput, relegated to the dustbin of history.
So the evil empire finally crumbled under the weight of its own bullshit. Got a glorious ending. Now let's talk legacy. Was the Soviet experiment a complete and utter failure?
It's a mixed bag, really.
Still like a communist grab bag full of broken promises and shattered dreams.
On the one hand, you have the undeniable horrors, the gulags, the purges, the stifling of individual freedoms. It was a system built on fear and control, and millions suffered under its iron fist.
Yeah, those weren't exactly their finest moments, but they did manage to launch a man into space, right? And what about those badass tanks they paraded around Red Square? Surely those count for something.
They had their technological achievements, no doubt, but it came at a steep price, the suppression of individual liberties, economic stagnation, and a culture of fear.
So basically they achieved some impressive feats, but at the cost of human suffering.
It's a reminder that progress without freedom is a hollow victory.
So the final verdict, was the Soviet Union a cautionary tale or a failed utopia?
It's a bit of both. It's a reminder of the seductive appeal of utopian ideals, but also of the dangers of sacrificing individual freedoms for the sake of some grand collective vision.
There you have it, folks. The Soviet Union, a fascinating, terrifying, and ultimately tragic experiment in social engineering. It's a reminder that even the most powerful empires can crumble under the weight of their own bullshit.
So let's all raise a glass to the demise of the Soviet Union, and let's hope we learn from their mistakes and never repeat them.
And on that note, we're signing off, you glorious bastards. Until next time, keep those brains churning, those questions coming, and remember, history may be a bitch, but it's a hell of a story.